You're listening to episode 55 of The Secular Buddhist. Welcome to The Secular Buddhist. I'm Ted Meissner. The Secular Buddhist is the podcast and website for modern, secular application of early Buddhist thought. The podcast has interviews and roundtable discussions pertaining to engaged Buddhist training and practice, and the companion website has show notes for each episode, along with resource materials on Buddhism, critical thinking, science, secularism, and skeptical thought. Though the podcast focuses on core practice from a secular viewpoint, more traditional teachings are welcome and openly discussed. Sam Trumbore speaks with us about chess, secular spirituality, and the value of having interfaith dialogues. You ever find yourself talking with someone and think you're just never going to find any common ground? We have taboo subjects where this comes up quite a lot: religion and politics. How many of us avoid talking about these at family get-togethers or with friends, or sometimes even those of our own tradition? Buddhism in the West is hindered by confusion, misunderstanding, and cultural hurdles that can impede people finding benefit from the practice. Those of us who've been curious about it have tried it out and experienced for ourselves the many ways in which Buddhism enhances our lives and our interactions with others. Secular Buddhists are an even more odd kettle of fish, because many of us incline towards a form of practice that is very different from any that has gone before. Even those with whom we are in complete alignment in our practice may be completely bewildered by this. How can we as people find common ground to allow us all to flourish? I would suggest meaningful dialogue would be a good start. Sam Trumbore is a long-time Vipassana meditator, has an engineering degree from Berkeley, is an avid chess player, and currently serves on the board of the Unitarian Universalist Buddhist Fellowship. So sit back, relax, and have a nice rhubarb oolong. Today's guest is Sam Trumbore. Sam, thanks for being here.
Happy to be here.
So we were talking about how in interfaith dialogues, and that's our topic for today, provide some value. And we'll be getting into that in a few minutes, but what I wanted to mention to the audience is how I first ran across you is from an article that you wrote in the Times Union on a review of the book Buddhism Without Beliefs, by Stephen Batchelor, who's been on the podcast before, and folks who are secular Buddhist practitioners are well aware of that name. And it was odd for me to read someone who comes from a Unitarian Universalism background speaking very positively about secular anything, let alone secular Buddhism. So that's what made me reach out to you. And what I thought I'd do, having chatted with you a little bit and done some research, is I found that your spiritual journey is a very interesting one. So I was hoping you would tell us about that trip and how you encountered and have integrated Vipassana in your practice.
Okay, well, I grew up as a Unitarian Universalist in a fellowship in Newark, Delaware, and it was a very secular experience. My father is a chemistry professor, and now retired, and my mother was a librarian, and I always say if you want to make a Unitarian, you have a professor and a librarian, because librarians love books, and Unitarians have particularly often a scientific interest and bent, because that's a core part of our spirituality, of our approach to religion, is the use of the mind. if you go back in the history of both the Unitarian and the Universalist traditions, that interest in the mind is a very core component of our tradition. So I was raised in this secular tradition and really didn't have much of a spirituality at all, basically a scientific approach to life. And I moved out to California, went to school there, was at UC Berkeley studying engineering. And while I was there studying engineering, I had some health problems, and that forced me to deal with some difficult situations that were happening. I had a broken leg that wasn't healing.
Yeah, you got mushed by a car, didn't you?
Yeah, I got hit by a car, and I went through a lot of stuff with that, and it didn't look like it was going to heal correctly, and so I was a little distressed. And sometimes they say that powerful experiences can sometimes be set up in your life by difficult emotional situations. So that was where I was. And oddly enough, I had a woman I was interested in who was one of my classes, and she was a good chess player, and I had played chess in high school. So we thought, hey, let's meet at a YMCA in downtown Berkeley and play a game of chess together, or maybe get matched up with some other folks. Well, I went, showed up, and she didn't. She stood me up, but I got matched up. Yeah, I got matched up with somebody who was a lot better than I was. And so I thought, oh, boy, I'm going to get creamed. And so I sat back and said, okay, well, maybe I'll learn something from this game. I hadn't been playing since high school that much. If you know chess ratings, I was like a 1,400 round when I was in high school, and she was like 1,600. So I was thinking, oh, no, it's a big gap there.
Not expecting a high performance from yourself at this one.
Yeah, well, anyway, so I sat down and I had this odd experience of playing chess that was as if I felt kind of like the game was being played through me. Now, I have played a lot of chess, and I've been really good, played really spectacular games where I've been really kind of inspired in my playing. So I know what it feels like to play well and not play well, but this felt qualitatively different to me, as if I was somehow... the moves were appearing in my mind, and I was somehow being guided. This was a subjective feeling of it. We analyzed the game. I won fairly handily, and although the experience of the game was quite good, and that I played a strong game, that wasn't really the core experience. There was something else in that experience that was transformative to me, and that was this experience of feeling this powerful presence of love. And it was something that I had never experienced in my whole life, this feeling of, loving broadly, as if I was sort of a channel of love or something like that. And I could barely sleep for the next 3 days. It was something that just opened me to another kind of experience of existence that was completely new to me. And I didn't know what to do with this. But I had a friend who was a seminarian who said, oh, you've had a religious experience. And I thought, oh, I've had a what?
Being raised secular, to hear that might be something.
Well, you're right. I mean, this didn't fit with my world. I didn't, people don't have, I didn't know, there's no Jesus or God or anything like that. I mean, it was just this feeling of this amazing experience of feeling the presence of love. And I thought, wow. So, oddly enough, I got invited to a gathering the next week, which was a psychic healing thing, and I thought, oh, Jesus, a lot of crap. I'll go, my friends invited me, so I'll go. I'll sit through it, and I was involved in this circle, and we'd all chant healing energy to this and send tones to this person in the center. And I reconnected with that experience. The feeling of that experience came back to me very strongly. I thought, oh, there's something going on here. So that kind of got me going. And in my exploration of things religious, that's when I encountered Buddhism. Another friend said, hey, why don't you go learn something about meditation? So I thought, oh, okay. And I sat in on this class with Jamie Barretts, who's a teacher out in California. He teaches at Spirit Rock now. And I was just moved by it. I said, this answers the questions that I've got going on. And that was partly because I had childhood illness, so I've always struggled with the difficulties of life, that things aren't always as great as everybody might think that they are. I didn't have this blessed childhood where I felt immortal and could do anything. I felt that I was dealing with illness quite a lot, and so I was very concerned that my life I might not survive into adulthood. So Buddhism is right on top of that. It deals with the unpleasantness of existence right up front with the Four Noble Truths. You know, you've got this nasty business of life's got this unpleasantness to it that you can't get rid of. You know, sickness, old age, and death is staring you right in the face. And when you're young, of course, you can ignore that because, you know, old age is forever and your body is in perfect shape and all that. But that wasn't my experience. So the fact that Buddhism started there and then connected it to psychology, I've always been interested in psychology and trying to understand how the mind works. And so the two coming together was just perfect for me. And I just immediately, like duck to water, went to the practice. Now, of course, with Buddhism, maybe in a past life or something like that, you know, maybe I was a Buddhist monk or something like that, and I was coming home again. I don't know, but I mean, it could be that, could not. I take reincarnation, a lot of the metaphysical, supernatural dimensions of it, and put it aside because I find that the actual psychological practice of meditation to be so valuable in my life that I don't need that other piece. I'm very much like Stephen Batchelor. He's really focused on the benefits that you can find just in the core practices, and that's really what the Buddha's taught. The Buddha didn't teach a lot of stuff about the stuff that came on later with all the different gods and heaven realms and all that stuff, although that is a piece. And I like how Stephen frames it as part of the cultural piece of the tradition.
Right.
So,
it's some part of the cultural accretions that have grown up around an early teaching that was very pragmatic, very down to earth, and that's why I tend to focus on, in secular Buddhism, the Four Truths, the Eightfold Path, that actual practice, what we do, doesn't have that stuff as part of it. It's what we're doing moment by moment.
That Eightfold Path is precious, because it's, you know, if the Buddha had stopped and said, there is this experience of nirvana, and you can have it, but it's just something like grace. I mean, this is the problem with Christianity. You know, if God decides that you're the one and gives you some of this grace, oh, great, you know, you can have this experience. Whereas Buddha says, you know, you don't need grace. You can just sit down, you can follow the Eightfold Path. It might take you a little longer, some people shorter, but keep at it. Maybe, you know, sooner or later, you're going to get progress on this.
Yeah, it inevitably leads to a state by which you have attenuated and perhaps eliminated suffering. But at the very least, you're reducing suffering, and that's a great benefit.
And then, but that's the hard part of dukkha is the problem with that word. And, you know, translated as suffering, I've heard the fellow out in California, Jeff Savicero, he has a great word. He likes to use the word stress. I really like Stephen Batchelor using the word anguish.
Anguish, yeah.
That's another good thing. But also, I like unsatisfactoriness too. I mean, you take all those terms, kind of mush them together, and you start getting at this. But I think what you're really looking for is to just sense it in your being, and that's what the practice is going to give you every breath a chance to taste, because most of us are constantly in this experience of, you know, restlessness, wanting things to be different than they are, lack of acceptance, or if something's pleasant, we're becoming anxious that it's going to stop. I mean, these are, to be able to see that directly in the practice is just so sweet and precious.
All right, because it makes your responses to it more reflexive, that as you practice, in the same way you practice playing a musical instrument or something like that, you get better at it so that you don't have to be as front brain about it every time you have a response.
I have a meditation group that meets in my congregation at 9 o'clock in the morning. We sit for 20 minutes and have some readings and some conversation. So it's 45 minutes of that, then the service starts at 10. And I constantly struggle with people's expectations because they sit there, they have their busy mind, and they feel like, oh, I'm not doing it right. Because we put this mental frame around the expectation of what meditation should be. And I struggle with that constantly to try to get people to try to just abandon all hope of enlightenment and just bring this fresh beginner's mind kind of experience to the next breath, and to see any time that they wake up from deviation from the breath as success rather than failure, to just try to program themselves that if they get distracted 100 times and are aware 100 times that they've wandered, that's tremendous success. Less successful would be starting the breath and hearing the bell and thinking, oh, I went by quick.
Yeah. What you're talking about is that there really is no bad meditation time, whether it goes as we want it to, where we enter a jhana state and we're blissed out and that's awesome, or we're fully aware, we're doing vipassana and all of our awareness is just very automatic and smooth and effortless and fresh. Yeah. Or whether we're having a really hard time and our mind wanders a great deal, and we have to keep bringing our mind back. That itself is practice. That's okay. That's not a bad thing.
Absolutely. And in fact, I sometimes think that the more unpleasantness in your meditation, the more difficult it is, the better, because that's a sense that you're making progress. Whereas if you are in this blissed out state where you're just enjoying your breath and just kind of cruising along, well, you're not dealing with the challenges that come up, because it's more trying to get good at dealing with difficult situations. The better practice you have with the difficulties in meditation, the better you're going to be able to practice the stuff when you're off the cushion.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, because most of us are not going to have the luxury of being able to spend 3 months where I practice at the Insight Meditation Society in Barre, Massachusetts, and they have a 3-month retreat. Well, I would just love to pieces to be able to do a 3-month retreat, but I got a full-time job, and I have to dedicate myself to dealing with a lot of challenging situations in my ministry with my congregation. So I'm constantly coming up against the challenges. I've got personalities to deal with. I've got people who've tried to figure me out and know where my weaknesses are and try to exploit them to get what they want. And so, churches are incredibly challenging places because you have all these personalities in conflict with each other and trying to get their way. And so the more centered and balanced I can be, the more presence that I can bring to the challenging situations. I mean, I have to say my congregation is a very wonderful place. I have great people in my congregation. That's not a negative there, but the reason that things are going somewhat smoothly in my congregation has to do with the presence that I bring to it that is from a lot of hours sitting on the cushion dealing with some really unpleasant stuff.
Well, and sharing that practice with others, and that within the congregation itself, you have an actual practice to help foster their own mindfulness and awareness of what it is that they're doing. What was it that made you decide to become a reverend? I know you were raised Unitarian Universalist, but what made you to make that step of becoming a reverend? Because that wasn't what you were studying in school.
No, I worked as an electrical engineer, computer science person. I was a test engineer for North Star Computers. Maybe some of your listeners will remember in the old days of microcomputers.
In the good old days,
when,
yeah.
the Horizon was our product that was in the North Star Advantage. We thought our business was going to be the one where everybody was using our computer products, and then IBM came along with the XT, and our sales dropped by 50%. In 1 month, so that kind of killed the business. But I was doing this religious exploration, in a parallel path with doing my work as a manufacturing engineer. And I was one of the things I was involved in is a dream group with a fellow named Jeremy Taylor, a wonderful guy out in Marin County, in Marin, California. And that group was very inspirational to me. And in the process of a really good session, as I was driving home, I realized that rather than bail out of my North Star and looking for another job, I had a really good offer at another company, and I was having some questions as to whether I should take that job or not. And it was in a flash of insight that I said, why I'm hesitating here is really seminary is something I want to move from engineering and follow this path. I found that when I had my free time, rather than studying to be a professional engineer, which was one of the things I could have done in my 20s to advance my career, or go out back and get a master's or something like that, I really was more interested in reading about religion and studying the different religions in the world and trying to develop my meditation practice. And I thought, if I really want to follow my heart, I should really go into ministry. So that was the decision I made, and applied to seminary, and they let me in. And even when I went into seminary, I was saying, well, maybe I'll go back into business and do this for a little while, and maybe I'll work for a nonprofit and do some sort of synthesis of spiritual computer programming or something like that. I don't know. But I did my internship in Rochester, New York, at the wonderful congregation there at the First Unitarian Church there. And that was such a positive experience for me. I said, this is great. If I can get a job doing this, I think this is what I'd like to do. So
yeah.
That's the deal for me.
I'm going to segue a little bit to one of the quotes that I have from you, something that you wrote on an article that I'll be linking on the episode page for this episode, folks who are listening to the podcast. You speak very eloquently about stories, and I'd like to read a few sentences that you wrote that I think people who have a particular secular approach to their spiritual journey will understand this. So I'm going to read this by about 10 lines to the audience. I believe in the power of stories to shape the meanings of our lives. I don't need to resolve the factual accuracy of the story for it to still speak to me. When I go to an historic play by Shakespeare, I don't fuss over whether he got his facts straight. When I read the Iliad, I'm not concerned with Homer's retelling of mythic history. Anything we receive through oral tradition has been enhanced to make it a better story. Any miraculous content in the stories operate to magnify the drama rather than undermine the meaning of the stories convey. Great stories survive over many generations because of the seeds of truth they carry between the lines. Our task is to find those seeds, plant them in our hearts, and encourage them to grow. That's beautifully said, particularly the ending of that. And there's a theme here of not having to believe in a literal truth. And I was wondering if you could talk for a minute about how people have been responding to that approach in your congregation.
Well, that's the Unitarian Universalist approach. We're a tradition of shared values rather than shared beliefs. So we organize around our purposes and principles. And most of our congregations, all of our congregations, really are non-creedal. You don't have to believe in God. You don't have to believe. You don't have to not believe in God. We've tried to put that aside. And so when you are working with sacred texts to the different world traditions, we're not going to read them as literal truth. We're going to read them and say, these were inspired stories. They have messages for us, but the messages that we're going to take from them are going to be messages that are going to help us in living our lives, and we're going to probably not fuss over the metaphysics of those stories.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And because, whether Jesus was the co-eternal Son of God or inspired person, we don't need to settle that to be able to take a parable that he gave and be able to work with that story. The Good Samaritan, you don't need to believe that Jesus was God to take the Good Samaritan story and get some really good stuff out of it.
Yep.
And the same thing is true with a lot of the Hebrew scriptures. The Bhagavad Gita is a profoundly powerful story, and you don't need to believe that it was Krishna as a God figure who was the one who was having this. And there's some pretty heavy metaphysical stuff that's in that too, but still there's wonderful messages that we can take for our lives, for living our lives, that are in those stories that are wonderful. So, and that's what I particularly like about the Theravadan, the Pali scriptures that come out of the Theravadan tradition that are so valuable to me is they're so practically oriented. The Buddha has somebody who comes to him and asks him a question about meditation practice, and so he says, okay, well, let's unpack that and try to see if we can understand it. The Buddha's never asking us to take anything that he says on faith, which is just perfect for a Unitarian Universalist audience.
Yep. Well, we keep
they're not
re-quoting
going to take anything I say on faith.
Right, and we keep re-quoting the Kalama Sutta here on the podcast that, you're not supposed to take it because someone says so or it's in scripture or by all these reasons. They're really the only way for you to ascertain whether this is of value to you is to try it yourself and see. And
right.
It works great.
Right, but there is an important piece that I both struggle with, but also find some comfort in, which is the concept of the Buddha as a refuge. And there's the struggle that I think many people have as they approach Buddhism is they sit down, they practice it for a little bit, and the fruits don't come very quickly. Maybe right away they don't get something. So they say, I don't know, maybe this is not for me, or maybe their mind is busy. So they say, I can't quiet my mind, so this is not for me.
I sat for 10 minutes and I can't levitate. What the hell? What's going on here?
Well, exactly. So, of course, you should be doing what the TM folks do. If you want to levitate, that's the way you...
Oh, don't get me started
anyway,
on the TM folks.
Oh, yes. But, well, and that's another thing. There's a lot of interesting paranormal stuff that's reported in some of the scriptures. But again, the Buddha always points people away from that stuff. So yeah, maybe you can fly in meditation, but that's not the point. That's not what we're about. That's one of the supernatural powers, but supernatural powers are not the point. The point is coming to know the nature of your mind, to know the truths of impermanence, the truth of stress, strain, of unsatisfactoriness, dukkha, to know, and even more vitally important than the emptiness of this concept of self that we think of, the eternal self. But I think that the concept of faith in the Buddha, confidence, instead of faith, he uses a different word. It's not coming to mind right now, but this sense of confidence in the Buddha that he attained enlightenment, and that this experience of nibbana or nirvana is this experience of cessation is possible. And once you've had the experience of sensation, then you're not confused anymore. And that everything kind of points you towards this because it's such a remarkable experience. You say, oh, he is right. This does exist, and you can cultivate it. I mean, that was what was valuable about my experience of have an experience of this kind of non-personal love. Oh, odd thing. Have it again. Oh, something that is not just a random event, but something that might be cultivatable. The same thing's true here with the Buddha. Just having the confidence that these things exist and that he has attained it, just cultivating that kind of experience, I think, has value. So this concept of taking refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, a lot of people who are kind of shy of faith and belief systems are kind of suspicious of this, and I think that there's a secular way to approach that. We have confidence in our doctors. We have confidence. Not all doctors have to.
No,
but there are doctors that do a really excellent job, and part of the ease and peace of mind of going into surgery is that you think the guy's going to do a good job, and you've persuaded yourself to allow yourself to be put under. So I think there are this experience of the confidence can actually be helpful in carrying you a little further into the practice until you start getting some of the fruits.
Yeah, that's one of the topics we've talked about a few times is the word faith itself in the Judeo-Christian sense, which is a lot of our backgrounds in Western culture, has a lot of Judeo-Christian connotations that many of us who are atheists, we're
right.
out atheists, we're secularists,
Absolutely.
are very uncomfortable with that idea that faith means I put my brain on a shelf and I just accept this because you say so. And that's problematic for a lot of us. Now, in early Buddhism, in the Theravada, in the Pali, the word is saddha, and it translates as faith, but it has that not the faith just because it's in a scripture or someone in authority tells you or any of those kinds of reasons, but there's this sense of confidence based on one's own experience. Now, what people have said in return to that is like, oh, but you have to have faith to start. And that tends to be used as a, see, so you're faithful. And I stop them immediately and say, no, that is absolutely not, from my perspective, the connotation or meaning at all that I'm using. I have curiosity, and I try something out of that curiosity. It's the same way with trying sushi, which I really like. I was curious about it, and I tried some and had good experiences with it and kept going and liked sushi. And so I had confidence that, yes, now I know when I go to a sushi bar, I'm confident. I don't have faith that I'm going to enjoy my sushi experience. I didn't start eating sushi because I had faith in sushi, because I was curious about it. Same thing with a meditative practice.
Yeah, and I think the process of developing that confidence is helpful. You were talking about curiosity. I'm always fascinated with the 7 factors of enlightenment and trying to cultivate those in my practice. And curiosity and investigation are key things that are so helpful in the beginning, is to bring that investigative mind to the practice, because that intensifies the concentration, that intensifies the awareness, and I think it helps the practice be more successful.
It does, helps energize it. I'm going to turn us to another direction and chat a little bit about interfaith dialogues. And you and I have both participated in them in the past. And tell us about your experiences with them and why we should have them, what value there is to them that you see.
Well, there's a defensive reason, which is if I can have positive relations with those who disagree with me, they're less likely to want to eliminate me or exterminate me.
Yep.
So that's kind of the floor I'm operating on here, that it's really important to have positive relations with those for those who disagree with me, because Unitarian Universalists are kind of a minority of religious traditions. So I wanted to, the more that I can propagate appreciation for our approach within the mainstream denominations, it's very helpful. I've also done a lot of community organizing kind of work, faith-based community organizing, in our capital region here in New York, and that requires me to be in relationship with people of lots of different faith traditions. And the more that I can connect with them, I think the easier our work becomes. It requires a certain amount of, I was going to say faith, but it's more it needs a vision of a possibility.
Mm-hmm. An openness.
An openness, that's a good word for it. An openness to a possibility of a change in the status of the poor and the dispossessed in our region, and that by cooperating together we can make a difference in that, to do the kind of work that we do in community organizing. If you have some experiences of that collaboration, that helps feed that openness to that possibility. But sometimes you don't have that until you've had some successes. And when you're in the building process of an organization, you need to link into each other's faith systems to see if we can harness the hooks that will bring them to the table. So I see interfaith work as a way to work on cooperation. So my appreciation for how faith works for those different religious traditions is really important. And also sometimes to be able to translate the language that they use into language that is meaningful for me, because certainly the aims of that interfaith work are mutually beneficial. They want, particularly the Catholics, I and the Catholic Church have quite different views on women's reproductive rights, on gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, queer issues. We have big gulfs between us. I was a big advocate for gay marriage in 2004 here. So that was a case where the Catholics and I are on completely different sides, but we agree about the poor, trying to lift the poor up in our region. And so we have to find the places that we can find a common language to share together to accomplish those goals. Now, sometimes some of that happens around Buddhism because there's certainly some real variation. There's a whole bunch of different kinds of Buddhists in our capital region. A lot of different. You got the Tibetans. You got there's a small Zen group here. There's some indigenous people who in this area. There's some Theravadins, and they all they're in their separate little zones. And we've had a couple of days of mindfulnesses and some other joint events, but it's hard sometimes to bring Buddhists together. I mean, we're all very friendly with each other.
We try to be. Sometimes we come to loggerheads with things like rebirth or the proper ways to chant or things like that. But in general, we tend to share the four truths, the Eightfold Path. That seems to be a fairly strong theme throughout. Someone had recently posted on the Facebook fan page that, we all share the triple gem, Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. And I said, actually, I'm not sure we do, because there are those of us, and myself included, and I know that some people may turn me off after listening to this, is I view Buddha in the same way that I view, say, Einstein or Darwin as people who had great ideas, and they formulated these ways which are observable facts of reality. That doesn't mean that thing that they observed, that they found, that they described, is dependent on their presence. I don't worship Darwin. I don't worship Einstein. I admire them. I thought they did great. And in Buddhism, it's a little different because this is someone who is a role model for the behavior that's being espoused, which is the Eightfold Path. But to say, when we talk about taking refuge in the Buddha as a representation of, here's your model for behavior. Awesome, right there with you. But many people in the world take it as a divine person to whom to make a prayer to get something you want. And I have a bit of a problem with that, and I know that is a big practice in certain areas. It's not my practice. So
well, I visited Thailand in 2006 to sort of see what indigenous Buddhism looked like, and I toured some of the temples that are the famous ones that you would go to when you're visiting Thailand and Bangkok and stuff like that. And it's almost like going to the Catholic Church and you light a candle for the saint and stuff like that. There's the rituals of putting coins in front of the Buddha statues and things like that. It wasn't something that I found personally attractive.
Well, and one of the episodes that's a few weeks ago, at the point this one comes out, was with Tim Ward on his book, What the Buddha Didn't Teach, and his experiences at one of the Thailand Wats when he ordained there for a short time, and his experiences and some of the challenges he had that's very similar to what you're describing in that. But that segues very nicely into what one of the things I wanted us to chat about was what you see as one of the biggest challenges to acceptance of people practicing in their own way, because I struggle with this as well.
When you want to practice as a community, there's always the question of how do you practice as a community? Just the basics. Do you sit with your eyes open or do you sit with your eyes closed?
Yeah.
Do you chant or do you not chant? Walking meditation. I prefer very slow walking meditation. If you're in a Zen setting, you all walk together and you sort of do this little marching thing. It's when people want to do this together that you start to run into all these kinds of problems. If you're going to do a sermon or a talk, a Buddhist talk, what material are you going to draw up from? What are the elements that you're going to emphasize? What are you going to de-emphasize? It's when you start doing community that it gets hard. As a Unitarian Universalist minister, we are not all the same. I've got people who are theists in my congregation who have a sense of God, or maybe transcendentalists. They sort of think of God in nature, or maybe pantheistically approach God. I also have a lot of atheists in my congregation. I have agnostics in my congregation who sort of, well, I don't know, could be, could not be. And then I've got people who connect with the Christian teachings more strongly. I've got a guy in my congregation, if I decide to do a parable reading out of the Bible, he'll stand up. Because in certain churches, that's what you do, is when the New Testament's read, you stand up. So you got this diversity, and so how do you create a community where the core practices that you do together support everyone in such a way that their practice deepens? With my meditation group, I've set up a format for it. I'm the first person who has done that in my congregation. We've been doing it for about 4 years now. And so I've established a tradition. The people who've been involved in it have come and stayed involved because they like that. Now, there's some people who probably come and left because they want to sit for 30 minutes, not 20 minutes, or they don't want to hear a reading, or they don't want to hear a conversation. They just want to come, sit, and be quiet the whole time and leave. So it's that's the whole problem with any kind of spiritual practice, is trying to do it with one other or more people. Because you're going to have differences of opinion, and because we all have unique personalities, certain things are going to work better for us than others. And the problem is that there's no solution.
Well, I think having an openness to the freshness and sincerity of other people's approaches, it works for them in the same way that whatever we do works for us.
Yes. But I tell you, for a while I've been doing a practice for a number of years called the Tao of Practice. It's a set of exercises that George Leonard and Michael Murphy outlined in a book called The Life We Are Given, and it's a wonderful practice. I've got a lot of physical benefit from it, and when I was in I served as a minister in Florida, and so I started up a practice there where we would do that. We'd sit and meditate. So we'd do the physical practice. We'd sit and meditate for 20 minutes, and then we'd chant for 15 or 20 minutes using Robert Gass has some really wonderful chant CDs, and they're kind of eclectic from different traditions, some Buddhist, some Christian, some Hindu, and they're just beautiful chants. So I'd play one of those chants, and we'd do that, and I got a lot of benefit out of that, and it was really nourishing for me and some of the people that came. But I haven't established it here in Albany because I just don't sense that there are people who would really resonate with that in my congregation. So it's just this challenge of trying to design something organically that meets the needs of the people that come together and not getting hung up on there is one right way to do it.
Right. I think that you've hit it right there, is getting hung up on there's one right way to do it. Not so much.
Not so
Dan,
much. There's just the right way that works for the people who are there, and trying to craft something. And over time, and this is what I try to do as Unitarian Universalist minister, is to get people to connect deeply with one way or one tradition, and then start to expand their appreciation so that they once they have a sense of depth, that they can start to appreciate how other people connect. Because I think that that's the challenge of the 22nd, 23rd centuries. Maybe we'll figure it out in the 21st, I don't know, is to learn how to, maybe we don't have to practice the same way. We don't even have to believe the same things, but we can appreciate the value that each of us is getting from our different traditions and be willing to maybe even participate in some way in each other's rituals and traditions enough so that to show respect, but not necessarily feel like, we're having to sign up for the whole thing, but to find some way to connect with the value others are getting from their different traditions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's it exactly.
And if we could do that as Buddhists, all the different Buddhist practices, I don't particularly get into the Zen or the Tibetan chants, but maybe I can learn to stretch a little bit around that and learn to appreciate them.
Because there is beauty in them, and that's part of it, is that we have
Absolutely.
a human experience, and as what I read before on the stories don't have to be oral; they can be visual, they can be auditory. There are all different kinds of ways of communicating a feeling and a message that aren't necessarily in ways we're used to accepting.
And a lot of the areas where we disagree with each other and get into conflict often has an emotional root. And I think that's what we have to recognize, is when we're having a negative reaction to something, how much is this really in our heads and how much of it is something deep inside of us that's emotional in its root and not terribly rational in its source, that maybe we grew up and there was some kind of a Catholic chant that we didn't like, and so as we approach Buddhist chanting, I don't want to be part of that because that's something that didn't resonate for me then, and so we're not really giving it a fair trial. We're just operating out of our own reactivity, which is what Buddhism really struggles with, to help us move away from emotional reactivity and more into a place of direct experience and direct insight.
Right, exactly. Now, you mentioned you have an event coming up.
I would love to share that with you. The Unitarian Universalist Buddhist Fellowship, it's a group of Unitarian Universalists who also have Buddhist practices, and these are practices throughout the different spectrum. There's you've got the Mahayana, the Theravada, you've got Zen, you've got everything in all the different Unitarian Universalist congregations. We have all different kinds of Buddhists in our movement. We come together to form a fellowship to advance both Unitarian Universalism and Buddhism and their intersection, because we believe that they are mutually reinforcing with each other. There's a lot of particularly where Unitarian Universalism is today, is it really desperately needs a way to go deeper that Buddhism provides, particularly for people with a more secular atheistic perspective, which Buddhism is not in conflict with. We're having we have a meeting every 2 years, and we're having a meeting in Garrison, New York, which is on the Hudson River just across from West Point, about an hour north of New York City. And it's going to be April 8th through the 10th. And we're going to have James Ford, who's one of the leaders in our Unitarian Universalist Association, who has transmission in both the Rinzai and the, I'm blanking on the other, the Soto and the Rinzai traditions. He has lineage in both, and he started something called the Boundless Way Zen Center that tries to do a little synthesis of sort of a more modern approach to Zen that integrates into the West and has a lot of Unitarian Universalist participation in it. So he's going to talk to us about that, bringing Buddhism to the West, because that's what a lot of what's happening in the Unitarian Universalist congregations is this exploration of how Buddhism can fit with. Go to the UUBF, UU Buddhist Fellowship, UUBF.org, and that's where you'll find it.
That's right. It's the UUBF.org. And if you put that in, you'll get right to the interdependent web of Unitarian Universalism and Buddhism, April 8th through 10th. We've been speaking with Sam Trumbore. Sam, people can find you on your website at www.trumbore.org. That's TRUMBORE.org. Sam, thank you so much for being here.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks very much.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the companion website at www.thesecularbuddhist.com, and you'll find an entire web page devoted to this and every episode. There are also links to discussions about today's topic on the Secular Buddhist Facebook fan page. The music for The Secular Buddhist is used by permission from John Kaizan Neptune's CD, Steps in Time. Additional music is provided courtesy of Monty Levinson of Taihei Shakuhachi and Rodrigo Rodriguez. Their websites are linked on The Secular Buddhist on the About Music page. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on The Secular Buddhist.